Hello guys, today I'll be ranking the albums from the band The Cult. Now, this is a band that I feel is pretty underrated, a band that I'd say deserves maybe a bit more recognition. Now, of course, it did have their time of popularity, mainly from the mid to late 80s, but in my opinion, they did still continue to release some pretty solid stuff after the 80s too. But they were really at their commercial peak from the mid to late 80s, but anyways, let's go ahead and dive into this ranking. Of course, it's just my personal ranking. You don't have to agree with it, but feel free to let me know your ranking in the comment section below. But yeah, there are a few placements in my ranking that could change any time. But anyways, we're going to go from worst to best. And at the bottom, I have Born Into This. A few decent tracks on it, but I just find this album to be not all that memorable. Um, I like the title track. I Assassin's pretty good. Dirty Little Rockstar is pretty catchy, but overall, the album to me just kind of lacks replay value, and again, isn't as memorable as some of their other albums in their discography. But next, we have the album Choice of Weapon. This album got some pretty solid reviews, pretty positive reviews. In my opinion, the songwriting was a bit more interesting on this album than the previous album, Born Into This, but I'll admit this is another album in their discography that I really think to return to. The album just doesn't have the strongest replay value or really, honestly, the strongest staying power, but the album does have some solid stuff on it. For the Animals, Honey from a Knife. The singles on here are pretty cool. The deep cuts, not the most memorable, but not bad. There is some good stuff on here, but again, doesn't have the strongest replay value. But next, we got Hidden City. Of their modern era, or from when they came back with Born Into This to now, I think this is probably the best they've done so far since their return. But yeah, this album, some of my favorites are probably Dark Energy, No Love Lost. Goat is a pretty solid track, has some pretty solid riffs on it. Hinterland is alright. Deeply Ordered Chaos is good. The album has some pretty solid stuff, and I find myself getting more enjoyment out of this album than the previous two albums personally, but either way, pretty solid album. Not their best, but also not their worst. But next we have Beyond Good and Evil. Now, this album and the next two honestly move around in my ranking. This album and the next two, again, probably the albums in the ranking that probably move around the most, but this is a pretty solid album. I know commercially it didn't do the greatest. I think it was due to lack of or it had to do with poor promotional choices, I guess. But either way, you get some pretty rocking songs on this album. I really like War. Rise, definitely one of the highlights on the album. It was also a single. Nico's pretty good, kind of an underrated song, and same with American Gothic. Speed of Light is also really good. Maybe one of the most underrated songs, to be honest. That was a pretty catchy song, but there's a lot of really great stuff on this album that I think gets pretty overlooked. But anyways, next to my ranking, we got the self-titled or the Black Sheep album. There are many names that have been placed on this album, but some people might have this album lower because I know this album is not really a fan favorite, but it's definitely a unique album in their discography for sure, and definitely has some of the most personal lyrics and has some pretty solid stuff on it, I'd say. But yeah, this album is definitely different, but I do really like Gone. The singles are pretty good, Coming Down and Star. Star probably being my favorite of the singles. Overall, pretty catchy song. Real Girl is maybe my favorite song on the album. Joy and Sacred Life are also pretty good, and I like Universal You, especially musically. But yeah, there's pretty solid stuff on here that I think kind of gets overlooked. Again, not their best, but I wouldn't say it's their worst either. But next we got Dreamtime, an album that's grown on me over time. At first, when I was getting into the Cult, I didn't really think much of this album. I did like a few songs, but most of the album just didn't really grab me very much in general. But I'm going to like this album more with time. But some of my favorite songs on the album are probably Horse Nation, Spirit Walker, 83rd Dream, Go West is pretty good. I do really like the title track. And Rider in the Snow is another song that I think is maybe one of the most underrated songs too. Pretty solid stuff on this album, and overall, not a bad debut. But next we have Ceremony, and yeah, this is a promotional copy. And I remember when I was getting the CD, I didn't expect it to be promotional, so this was definitely a pretty cool surprise. But I know some people might have Dreamtime above this album, but I don't know. I enjoy this album. Now, of course, with this album, you can also notice that you can really notice Ian's influence, especially with the songwriting. But you get some pretty interesting tracks on here, like Ceremony, Sweet Salvation, and Bangkok Rain are also pretty good too. Kind of underrated, I'd say. But the most underrated song on this album, in my opinion, is maybe White. Might benefit from a little bit of trimming, maybe, but either way, it's always been one of my personal favorites on the album. Maybe one of my favorite songs from the Cult, maybe, but I don't know. I think Why is a really underrated song. I really dig that song. You know, of course, you also have the hits like Wild Hearted Sun and Heart of Soul, which are also other highlights on the album too. Earth Mofo is also pretty good. Full Tilt is another pretty solid song. That's pretty much kind of one of the bangers on the album, but yeah, overall, pretty solid album, I'd say. But next we have Electric. You can definitely hear the AC/DC-ness in this album, but it was, of course, produced by Rick Rubin. And some of my favorites are Wildflower. I really like Peace Dog. Probably my favorite of the non-singles. Either that song or King, Contrary Man, or the album closer Memphis Hip Shake. But the singles are also pretty good too. Lil Devil, Love Removal Machine is definitely a classic and definitely one of the highlights on the album. But yeah, there's some pretty solid stuff on this album and definitely one of their best. But next we have Love. Now, this album and the album that I have at the top, they honestly go back and forth. They honestly fight for number one. There are days where I have this one as my number one, but also there are days where I have Sonic Temple at the top. But this album, you can definitely hear the 80s all over this album. Definitely of its time, but still an album that I'd say still holds up. You get some pretty solid tracks like Nirvana, Big Neon Glitter, Brother Wolf, Sister Moon. I love that song. Definitely one of the best songs in my opinion. Has an interesting atmosphere / vibe to it. I do really like Hollow Man, and of course you have the classic She's So Sanctuary. Definitely, of course, one of their best songs. You can say the same thing with Rain. A lot of great songs on the album. And finally, at the top, we got Sonic Temple. This probably comes to no surprise for many fans, but you can honestly either point to this album or Love as their best. Some people might say Electric too, maybe, but the albums I see the most that are usually cited as their best or as their favorite is usually either Love or this album. But many great songs in here, many classics like Sun King, Firewoman, Edie, which is maybe my favorite song from this band, maybe. If not, then it's, of course, definitely top 3. You also get some pretty solid deep cuts too, or non-singles. I do really like New York City. Automatic Blues is catchy and just a blast to listen to. All around an excellent album. But anyways, that's my ranking for the band The Cult. Let me know your thoughts on my ranking. Do you have any of these CDs? Do you still listen to this band to this day, and all the good stuff? And also, again, let me know your ranking in the comment section below. But anyways, thanks for watching. Leave comments and like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.